They bought the boat, a Gib'sea 42. They outfitted it and made repairs and even converted it to electric drive with a battery pack from a Nissan Leaf. They had a life raft and everything they should have needed. They started a YouTube channel to document the adventure and sailed all the way around North America to get to the starting line before crossing the Atlantic over to Europe. But things went wrong, and in one of the most elusive, unsolved sailing mysteries of the last year, it all came to a really mysterious end. At the end of this video, I'm going to leave you with a special video made by the people we're talking about that I think is a great way to remember what happened, so please stay tuned for that. Brett had a long love affair with the sea. He sailed and swam and adventured in and around the water and worked as a mechanic on ferry boats. And like many of us do, he had a dream to fully experience everything the world had to offer him by way of his sailboat, Theros. Theros was a Gib'sea ketch, which is a name we don't actually hear very often. They're made by Gilbert Marine and they were founded in 1972, initially as a builder of small keelboats. They soon progressed to be a major builder of cruising-oriented yachts. Gib'seas have always featured simply fitted out but very practical interiors on well-built hulls. By the mid-1990s, the company was struggling to compete as an independent builder with the larger and more highly automated productions of folks like Beneteau, and Gilbert Marine was taken over by Dufour in 1997, who continued to produce a range of yachts under the Gib'sea name, these retaining that simple and open interior that had always been a feature of the Gib'sea brand. After a lifetime of sailing, Brett found himself flying over to the UK in 2015, but not on an adventure, so to speak. He was flying there to donate his kidney to his sister. That's what kind of sailor Brett was. In the UK, Brett found himself waiting for a bus to get back to the place he was staying when he struck up a conversation with a lovely lady 10 years younger than himself. This was Sarah. They started chatting and ended up sitting next to each other on the bus for the ride, talking about their shared love for travel and adventure. The next day, they met for tea because that's what you do in Europe on a date. Then another date for a walk on the beach and another one for lunch. In their chats, Brett mentioned Theros, his other love, and his yearning to sail around on a big adventure, and Sarah was intrigued. In the spring of 2016, Sarah jumped on a plane to go visit Brett back at his home in Canada, and she met Theros for the first time, the 42-foot sailboat, awash with different projects that Brett was working on, a real DIY sailor after my own heart. Sarah says, he took me on my very first yacht trip and I loved it. She was in, the boat, the sailing, the whole adventure. And so was Brett. He proposed to Sarah right there on Theros, and the whirlwind love affair is in full swing. They get married on the boat and then have a second ceremony at Stonehenge. I didn't even know you could do this, but they did. The marriage quickly ramps up the travel plans, and the two of them set out to get Theros ready for their retirement adventure. The goal is to get the boat from the west coast of Canada around to the east coast so they can sail to Europe. As basically the first step, they have to round an entire continent. To make matters more difficult, they're going to convert the boat to electric. Now, most sailboats, as we know, have diesel engines that will happily sip fuel all day long without missing a beat, but Brett and Sarah have a green ambition. They have an electric Nissan Leaf car, and they love the idea of doing everything as green as possible. So they yank that diesel from Theros and install an electric motor. Now, anyone who's seen or thought about electric drive on a sailboat knows the one limiting factor is range from the battery, how far you can go. The electric motor is super simple and never really needs much maintenance and is boundlessly reliable, but to power that simple electric motor, it gets very expensive and very complicated in the batteries. But they have a solution. Instead of spending tens of thousands of dollars on lithium batteries and then wiring them all together, they take a page from their car. They get their hands on a Nissan Leaf battery pack and install that power to the electric motor inside Theros. This is crazy. Now, I've done about 10,000 nautical miles in my sailing career, all with a diesel engine, and 10,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to what Brett and Sarah want to do, and I couldn't imagine doing it without my trusty diesel. Electric is fine for getting your sailboat in and out of the slip or in and out of the harbor after a nice day sail, but to properly travel and make 100-mile days, the range on the batteries on electric sailboats just isn't enough for me. But Brett and Sarah are trailblazers. Here's a snip from the early days while they planned to sail around North America.
Hi there folks, this is Brett Clibbery. I'm in London in Battersea Park. Pretty well 2 weeks away from being back on Theros in Salt Spring and finishing the final touches before we head off on a sailing journey that will start with taking us to California and along the California coast to San Diego.
Now it's my turn. I'm the other half of Theros Sailing Adventure. I'm the first mate on board, and with Brett over the last couple of years we've been busy refurbishing her, getting her ready for our round the world voyage, and I can't really believe it, but we're just a couple of weeks away from actually setting sail. We hope to set sail by the 1st of August.
They started this YouTube channel and a blog and a Facebook travel page to document all the stuff they were planning to do, and people started watching, following their journey and interacting with them in the comments. The camera work and the audio gets better and better as they go on, and they start to get more followers. The two set out down the west coast of Canada, the US, and find themselves exploring San Francisco Bay for a while they continue to modify Theros for the journey ahead. This boat has all sorts of stuff done to it besides the electric drive and the Nissan battery. They rebuild the hard Dodger. They modify just about everything on board to better suit their needs. That's the beauty of being a DIY sailor. If you don't like it, change it. They went further south, exploring and experiencing cultures unknown to them, filming YouTube videos along the way, and they came to the Panama Canal. They paid their dues and they made their way across from the mighty Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean side. Fast forward through all their amazing adventures that you can see if you go watch their YouTube channel, I'll leave a link, they finally land at the destination, the east coast of Canada. The next leg of the journey was planned to be sailing across the mighty North Atlantic over to Portugal to hike the Camino Trail. But when they set off from land out into the Atlantic, things immediately went wrong. A huge storm system moved in, forcing them to turn back around and head back to the port that they just left from. With their spirits bogged down and feeling a little bit defeated, they changed tacks. They decided to fly back to the west coast and leave Theros on the hardened storage while they went home to build a house. They continued the YouTube channel while they built this house and documented their new adventures. They went hiking and kayaking and exploring the beautiful west coast. But the dream of sailing to Europe wasn't gone. It was just delayed. They flew back to Theros to work on her anytime they could, dealing with that electric drive system and installing a big array of solar panels. And this might be where we get a little bit controversial. In the sailing world, the decision to go electric drive was already controversial enough. And then the Nissan Leaf battery. Depending on which one they use, these batteries can weigh between 700 and 900 pounds. Now, a proper cruising boat like a Gib'sea 42 ketch weighs about 25,000 pounds by itself, so an extra 1,000 really isn't the end of the world as long as it's low in the hull, preferably below the waterline. Ocean-going boats are often measured by a capsize screening formula, basically a bunch of math that tells the potential boat buyers which boat is most likely to survive in the big seas of the ocean. A capsize screening formula takes into account the weight of the boat and the beam or width and comes up with a number. Ideally, an ocean-going boat should have a capsize screening score of 2.00 or less. A Gib'sea like this one scores 1.98, so just inside what's considered safe for ocean travel, before adding the batteries and other hardware you'd need to live aboard, water makers and spare parts, all that stuff. To power this new drive system, Brett and Sarah needed solar and a lot of it, so they installed 6 solar panels to help replenish the battery system. But there's not really any way to remeasure a sailboat after a significant modification, so how much all these changes impacted the boat's ability to be safe at sea would just be a guess. Back at home on the Pacific side, they started their greatest adventure ever, calling it the Green Odyssey and launching videos about it on YouTube and Facebook. They drive their electric Nissan Leaf over 3,000 miles across Canada, coast to coast, to arrive at Theros. That's the first leg of the journey. And then they plan to sail her to Portugal. And the final chapter is to hike that Camino trail that they want to go do. If I ever get to retire, I want to do this. It's super cool. You can go watch their whole trip in detail on their YouTube channel, but we'll jump back in at the boat. They get everything on board and get ready and polished and primed and load the boat down with supplies and food to last them the whole way across the ocean. They won't be sailing right from point A, Halifax, to point B, Portugal. It's much safer to stop along the way to resupply, to repair, and rest wherever you can. And conveniently, there's a group of islands situated in just the right place, the Azores. This 1,800-mile hop from Halifax should take a boat like Theros about 20 days of good travel across the sea, and the plan is to usually hang out in the beautiful Azores enjoying civilization again. You'll have to spend 20 days at sea with no other humans, so landing in the Azores for the first time after that kind of trip is a big deal. After staying in the Azores, they have just 1,000 miles left to get to Portugal. Now, thousands and thousands of couples have done this. They've bought the boat, they've outfitted it, and sailed to the Azores and beyond. There are books about this, YouTube channels, guides, even rallies, where a whole bunch of these boats go together. This is not reinventing the wheel. Brett and Sarah did everything right up to this point. Before leaving, they installed a spot tracker too that uploads their position to the internet so their family and friends could follow along, and they filed a float plan which predicted the arrival in the Azores as July the 2nd, and they set off. These pictures were taken as they left Halifax for the last time. Hours later, and about 16 miles out to sea, they still had internet service and were able to upload a video to update everyone on the beginning of their travel in the mighty Atlantic. This would be the last update we'd ever get.
Well, we're away from the Nova Scotia coast now. We're 16.6 nautical miles from where we started, which is probably 12 miles inshore. And we're doing 5.5 knots average, so we're not doing bad. If the wind stays the same as it is right now, we're basically east-southeast, which would get us to the Azores. So we'll see. We're sailing away. One big ship on the horizon, and that came out behind us from Halifax, and so they're out of our way. We'll see. We're sailing.
Now, there are a number of safety features we fit to sailboats just in case the worst should happen. We note in the final pictures of the boat, the dinghy is up on deck under a cover and looks to be inflated. And also, the life raft is on the coach top roof, ready to deploy. Brett made a video about this life raft, which will come into play, so let's check that out.
Installing the hold downs for the life raft. We'll have one on either side, a strap over with a hydrostatic release, just in case we sunk and we needed the life raft.
We had our life raft recently rechecked and repacked by a company in Victoria so that we know that everything is in working order.
This is where things go wrong. The beacon they installed to broadcast their position to friends and family was working just fine up to the point of the video we watched, but on June 13th, it suddenly stopped broadcasting. Nobody could see them on the internet anymore. Now, this could be a failure of the equipment, a loss of power, or the beacon could be underwater. We don't know what happened to the beacon, and as we'll find out, we don't really know anything else for sure. After the beacon stopped broadcasting, the family started to get worried and started to make calls and ping all the social media accounts to reach Brett and Sarah, but there's no reply. Remember, this is June 13th. They just left days before. The beacon could simply have failed or was failing to broadcast, and they could actually be just out of range of internet and radio. Everything could be going just as planned. Days went by and still no word. Family and friends continued to reach out to them and the authorities to get someone to go and check on them and try to find them. More days passed, a week, 2 weeks, still no word. No authorities were searching. It wasn't until July 2nd, some 20 days later, that a search began. The float plan that they had filed called for arrival in the Azores on July the 2nd. So when they didn't show up on that day and there was no radio or radar contact of them on July the 2nd, authorities finally declared them missing and sent the search parties. Helicopters flew over the coastal areas where they should find their boat on both sides of the ocean, and planes flew across on their path. Radio broadcasts were made to passing ships to be on the lookout for Brett and Sarah aboard Theros, but no one saw them. No contact at all, no radar or AIS or sightings of any kind. They were just gone, vanished from the sea until July 12th. 10 days later, Canadian law enforcement said in a post, RCMP Halifax Regional Detachment responded to Sable Island National Park Reserve after a boat containing human remains was discovered. On July 10th at approximately 3:15 p.m., RCMP, Halifax Regional Detachment, and Joint Rescue Coordination Centre were contacted by Parks Canada after a 10-foot inflatable boat was found washed ashore with 2 deceased people on board. At this time, it's thought to be a lifeboat for a larger vessel named Theros. The remains are believed to be 2 of those sailors, a 70-year-old man and a 60-year-old woman from British Columbia. They were reported missing to the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre on June 18th after leaving Halifax Harbour on June 11th en route to the Azores. The Nova Scotia Medical Examiner Service is working to make positive identifications. The next day, on July 13th, Brett's son James posted on Facebook, "The past few days have been very hard. My father, James Brett Clibbery, and his wife, Sarah Justine Packwood, have regrettably passed away. There's still an investigation as well as DNA tests to confirm, but with all the news, it's hard to remain hopeful. So far, this has made it to several news outlets around the country, and I have only just spoken to the coroner today. I'm so very sorry to the people who were friends with them. They were amazing people, and there isn't anything that will fill the hole that has been left by their, so far, unexplained passing. Living will not be the same without your wisdom, and your wife was quickly becoming a beacon of knowledge and kindness. I miss your smiles. I miss your voices. You will be forever missed." Now, while the remains of Brett and Sarah were found on the island off the coast of Canada, Theros was never found. Some boats drift around the Atlantic for years without sightings, and some wash up on the beach weeks later. Having not found her, we have no idea what actually happened because there's no evidence and no one to tell the story. But here's what we do know. Theros had a dinghy and also a life raft to deploy in an emergency. All the official reports say they found them in a 10-foot inflatable boat. Now, the emergency deployable raft they had on board would have been about 10 feet, and the dinghy they carried on deck was 10 feet as well, and there's no report which confirms which one of the two that they were in, the emergency deployable life raft or the 10-foot dinghy. But what we do know is they got themselves into the 10-foot boat, whichever one, because that's where they were found, which means they got off the Theros. And for anyone to abandon their ship mid-Atlantic, they would have had to have had a good reason. Maybe a sudden hole from hardware failure or a collision with another ship. The authorities inspected every ship they would have crossed paths with. Because the freighters are so big and powerful, they may not even notice running down a sailboat. But they found no evidence that anyone had hit anything. If the boat was holed for any reason, it would have sunk, automatically deploying that life raft, and they would have gotten in. Others say it may have been a fire. There was an awful lot of lithium battery on board, and if even one of them had failed, it would have been catastrophic very fast. There's also the possibility that the boat may have capsized from the modifications made to it, making it less seaworthy than it would have been normally, which would have caused the life raft to deploy. If the Theros is ever found, we may get some answers, but for now, we just have to live with not knowing. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, the only real takeaway I have about the boat is that it seemed to lack an EPIRB. This is a device that's basically like pulling the fire alarm at sea. If it's triggered, it broadcasts an emergency and its position to every known radio and GPS wave on the ocean, and ships from all around are required to respond. Pulling the EPIRB would immediately direct aircraft and fast rescue boats, recreational pleasure craft, oil tankers, and everyone in between directly to their location. So an EPIRB was not triggered. There's no word on whether or not Theros had one on board because they aren't actually required, they're just suggested. The only other takeaway is that it took 20 days for the rescue search to actually commence. So we know they clearly survived whatever happened to Theros and they got themselves in the dinghy or the life raft. But in that 20 days, they died at sea. You wouldn't imagine having to survive for 20 days after the mothership sinks, and maybe there's something to think about there. What do you guys think? What else can we learn from this story? Leave a comment below, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to leave you with a video that Brett and Sarah made that I think is a great way to remember them. I'll see you guys next time.